manner that I'm going to do today, but I want to make sure I only speak for my 10 minutes, so I'm going to be tied to my manuscript a little bit more than usual. Okay, here we go. Americans cannot freely roam Cuba. They must attend educational and cultural sessions under the watchful eye of their guides. They are escorted from state-approved tourist sites that demonstrate the many talents, innovations, and resourcefulness of the Cuban people. As state-approved sites, these sites clearly have a rhetorical agenda for promoting Cuba and portraying Cubans in a positive light. I contend that in addition to overt rhetorical messages of industriousness, there is a covert rhetorical message of protest. Protest rhetoric in a country that does not embrace free speech can be a tricky endeavor. Artistic expression, however, is one of the ways in which a rhetor can create a statement of protest without overtly opposing the state. For example, the Lysistrata is an excellent example of politically unpopular protest rhetoric from the classical period. The arts can be interpreted in many ways, after all, and an artist can claim plausible deniability or lack of intent in a message that is perceived to be a criticism or a statement of protest. I will focus on 3 state-approved tourist sites that demonstrate the overt message of industry, as well as a covert message of protest. Ariel Gato Miranda's art gallery in Las Terrazas, Edición Sevilla in Matanzas, and Fusterlandia in Havana. The message of industry will be self-evident, I believe. The rhetoric of protest is much more subtle and will be measured via post-introductory narratives to the sites, reliance on discarded items and other detritus to produce marketable product, and the apparent lack of any reasonable alternative for production. Las Terrazas is a planned eco-community created in response to deforestation and consequent erosion in the hillsides in the area. The hills were terraced and reforested, and a recreational lake was constructed as well as a school. The town has a hospital, a senior center, a resort complex complete with zip line, and various shops. A 2014 travel article in the travel section of the UK's Independent described Las Terrazas in this manner. In 1968, President Fidel Castro forged the idea of a green revolution. He would reforest the mountains that had been logged by Spanish conquistadors, plant fruit trees in the areas destroyed by coffee plantations, and nurture land ripped up by hurricanes. And he would improve the lives of Cubans campesinos in this part of the island, mainly illiterate charcoal makers, who lived in poverty in remote rural ridges of the Sierra del Rosario Mountains. So that's Las Terrazas. Artist Ariel Gato Miranda's art shop is one of these developments. He features recycled paper products that include realistic, artistic greeting cards, small posters, writing tablets, and the like, as well as some wood products. So, visual aid. Lynne bought this little greeting card at his shop. It's a lovely little greeting card made of recycled paper. The envelope is even more interesting because you can see the pulp in it. So this is the kind of product they are producing. The host explained in his introductory narrative that everything is recycled and or repurposed. He detailed the paper creation process, which seemed incredibly tedious to me, and he urged us to purchase the paper products, as Lynne did. And the number of items for sale was very limited. We could also purchase these hummingbirds, $5 a piece, or 4 for $15. 15 Cuban dollars are about equivalent to US dollars right now. Keep in mind that the average monthly salary of a Cuban is about $20 to $30. So buying 4 hummingbirds for 15 set somebody up pretty well for them. Elizabeth Jacobson and I bought 4 of these birds. I'll show you these ones. And during the exchange of buying them and getting the four, the host explained that the birds were constructed from small bits of lumber from 4 different kinds of trees. They can be disassembled. They can be disassembled and reassembled in any combination you want. He wrapped each bird, this is interesting to me, he wrapped each bird in discarded inventory lists that had been printed on dot matrix printers. Remember those old edges in the drawer? That was the paper used. Here I contend that the message of protest came in the form of a rather frantic explanation of repurposing the wood chips. Lacking any other form of supply, the artist relied on detritus to construct a product. The art of recycling becomes the art of no alternatives. Imagine what the artist could do if he didn't have to spend this incredible amount of time creating the raw product. Don't worry if the wings fall off or the tail. It'll stick back on. The next site under examination is Edición Villa, a small batch publishing company that creates 200 copies of individual handwritten and hand-bound books. This is an example of what they produce. This is a blank journal that I brought back at Greenwood. I'll pass this around to you. You can see that it's pretty rudimentary. There's a leaf attached to the cover and other very simplistic art pieces attached to it. This slide shows a repurposed door with the company logo, this lighted lamp is the company logo. This decoupage mural was in the back of the shop in a covered courtyard on the way to the bathroom. Decoupage is constructed by small bits of paper adhered to, in this case, a wall. Another example of art in the bookshop is this mural, which is also decoupage, but it has 3-dimensional elements. You might not be able to see those. 3-dimensional elements right there. The wings and the lamp cord. The young man is one of the calligraphers. Again, the shop is decorated via the use of detritus. More perplexing in the shop, however, was this living statue. There were a lot of living statues in Cuba, by the way. It's kind of a thing they do. This performer did not speak, but he welcomed photographs. He is dressed in a steampunk-style outfit. I don't know if you can see it, but gears, one foot's bigger than the other. There's this kind of Tin Man sleeve on his left arm. He looks like the Tin Man and is covered in gears and cogs and has a clock prominently displayed on his chest. Rhetorically, this mascot is an interesting choice for a bookshop. Handwritten books are incredibly time-consuming to produce, hence the clock makes sense. But what about the gears? Is it an expression of the artist's feeling dehumanized, like cogs in a machine of production? I contend that this mascot may be interpreted as a rhetorical message of protest. Again, what other, perhaps more productive ways could these workers be spending their time? Perhaps writing their own novellas instead of copying others' novellas by hand. Finally, the last site is Fusterlandia. This is an idiosyncratic explosion of random mosaic images. The host narrative for this site offered a creation myth of the neighborhood that started when a neighbor had a hole in his wall and no supplies with which to repair the hole. The artist Fuster offered to cover the hole with a broken plate that he had in his mosaic shop. Once other neighbors saw the patch job, they wanted in on the action, and Fusterlandia was born. Again, this introduction narrative tells of yet another story of the use of detritus to create a product, and in this case, the product covers decay and disrepair. Visitors to Fusterlandia are greeted by this image of the ubiquitous Che and Fidel, clearly a political statement set in an area with random other images like these mosaic giraffes. In many ways, Foosterlandia is the best example of this mix of industry and waving the flag, literally, we've got the flag, literally and figuratively, and the message of protest. The creation myth voices the problem of communal disrepair and lack of funds or standard supplies with which to make simple improvements. I'll conclude with these images. On the right is a building that has not been maintained. It's a pretty typical building. It has a guard dachshund on the on the roof. Dogs on roofs were pretty common, an uncommon sight. The other two structures perhaps represent an image of hope in the cross, but also a reminder that eyes are everywhere, always watching you. At this juncture, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, you can kind of ignore that title because I'm going to change it because I want to piggyback up. Well, Tammy's talking about art and how there's sort of could be this underlying sense of protest. I'm seeing the same thing in the economy, only it's kind of overt. We start with the basic premise: Cuba's economy is a mess. There's no getting around it. And while the embargo is a big part of that, it's really their regime's commitment to a fully communist system that's failed. Therefore, Cubans, the ordinary Cubans, have to go through incredible lengths to survive, literally to survive. I mean, famine was common in Cuba, as you'll see when we get to the special period. And the government, in order to maintain its control, weaks, ignores it. So everyone openly talks about the black market, openly talks about how they're evading the rules, and you get this culture that I think is going to be a major obstacle to any future economic development. So, first of all, let's do some demographics, because you'll see how whatever they have is creating some odd behavior. The interesting number there is first of all, Dominican Republic, neighboring country, third world country, Cuba, which is the poorest country I've ever been in. And yet look at how similar they are to the United States. The really important number is that number 10. Cubans aren't having children. And the reason is because they can't afford them. Abortions are free. I've read about one set of sisters in a New York Times article that between them had 7 abortions. They wanted children, but they couldn't afford them. They and their husbands could barely survive as it was. We had a taxi driver who was a physics professor at a university, had to quit. And he said he really loved teaching. He'd much rather be a teacher than a cab driver. But as he said, we have a son, as though that explained it. He had to earn dollars in order to survive. If you look at food, I mean, basic necessity. First off, food. Cubans can buy food in the United States. We can export food to Cubans. Always been exempted from the embargo. They import 80% of their food, including 100% of the ubiquitous rice. You can't have a meal in Cuba without rice. All that's imported. And food is rationed. Every Cuban has a certain amount of food they can buy in the store, but it's not enough to survive. Therefore, just to live, you have to go to the black market. Now, one byproduct is you see very few overweight Cubans. Seriously. The only overweight Cuban I remember seeing was our tour guide, who was maybe 10, 15 pounds overweight. But see, she's in an industry with access to dollars. Okay, she's going to have way above. As Tammy said, the average income in Cuba is about $30 a month. Okay, she's going to get that easily, being a tour guide, and well above that. And yet, here's the paradox of Cuba. We drove through the western third of the country. You see field after field just sitting there. No crops. Now there is a cow, or horse, all right, which is a pretty unproductive animal on that land. But you see miles and miles of empty fields. Now in the countryside, people can grow their own food. Now we were there in April, so you're not going to see much of crops. The crop you see to the right of the picture is tobacco. But you can see how that is going to be the family's garden for their food. So you say, great, but they can't sell it to anyone. Legally, you can't sell it. However, we saw when we were on Benito's farm, Benito's tobacco farm is worth a whole hour. A pineapple guy came by with his cart, and he had pineapples, sold some to Bonito. He was going to go in town and sell them to the restaurants. Overt, wide open, illegal, but it's what they had to do. Now, the Cuban regime will adapt in the face of crisis. The major crisis came in late 80s, early 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and they stopped subsidizing Cuba. And you can see, I think it was in 93 or 4, their economy shrank 15%. That's worse than what Greece has gone through. This is when starvation was real. Even though they could buy food from the United States, they didn't have any money as a country to buy the food. This is when Helms-Burton Act got passed. And going forward, one of the things Clinton did, and basically to be cynical, he was trying to get the Cuban vote in Florida for his re-election. So Helms-Burton tightened up the embargo to kick Cuba while they're down. And the more important thing is, up until that time, the embargo starts with Kennedy. Up until that time, the embargo is an executive action controlled by the president. Clinton gave away that right, so now Congress controls the embargo. So if you think the embargo is going to be relieved, done away with, you're thinking Congress is going to act. Yeah. So anyway, where you see in 2005 the spike in their GDP, that's when Fidel steps down, he's sick, and Raúl takes over. Raúl had been in charge of the military, and what he had done during this intervening period is get the military out of the military and put them into business. Many of the state-run businesses, restaurants, hotels are really owned by the military. So he came up with the cuentapropistas, which are independent entrepreneurs. You're allowed to be a private entrepreneur in 201 industries. Now, I didn't want to list all 201. So the number 16 popped into my head, and we did every 16 one. Benny Murray was a dancer, he died in '63, so it's a Cuban dancing carnival. You see what they are. Some are very trivial. Now I want to point out number 96 and 144. This is not recreational. This is the way we saw fields being plowed by oxen. Okay? And it's not like they're Amish. It's because that's what they have. So those are important industries. We have, sorry, I shouldn't have gone back. We have part-time farmer. There's a guy out with a machete cutting his tobacco on Benito's farm. I'm going to go backwards again because I want you to see number 176. By pure chance, my system got me to the one we're most interested in. That's us in a 1928 Ford. The driver is an immunologist. 10 years of medical training, including 2 in Europe. She had spent 4 years practicing in Africa. One of the ways the Cuban government earns foreign exchange is they export healthcare workers. She had come back to Cuba, knew her grandfather had this car in a barn, took the engine out and put it in a diesel engine, because that's the kind of gas they can get. And she's no longer a doctor. She's now a cab driver at night because she doesn't want the car to be exposed to the sun. Okay, that's Cuba. One last thing. This picture is taken by your system. Family is important in Cuba. You can own your own home in Cuba, but you can't sell it. You can trade it, but you can't sell it. Okay? If you happen to be married to someone who also has a house, you can't rent the second house unless it's to a family member. So everybody's related. Our tour guide who's rented an apartment in Havana, she's open about it. She says, yes, we've agreed that the woman's my aunt. If anyone asks, she's my aunt. And it's the same thing. If you're a contrapropista and you hire a sixth worker, you pay massive increase in taxes. Unless it's a family member. So you go into a restaurant, they're all related, supposedly. And everyone just winks at that. And it's that culture of tax evasion and ignoring the rules that is necessary to live, but it's inefficient, it's wasteful. I mean, a physics professor and an immunologist being cab drivers to survive, that's pretty inefficient. And it's not going to change. The embargo is going to stay in place. And the Cuban Communist government is quite convinced that they're doing the right thing. So that's the pessimistic end of it. So now, Lynne is going to tell us more about the contrapropistas.
I'm going to pick up where Tony left off and go a little bit deeper into private business and entrepreneurship in Cuba. As many of you know, the Cuban Revolution was 1959. Fidel Castro and his government nationalized most of the foreign-owned sectors of Cuba: sugar mills, oil refineries, utilities, transportation. Eventually, they went on to all privately owned land and homes also moved to the state. By 1968, what Castro called his revolutionary offensive nationalized the remaining 58,000 private businesses without reasonable compensation in Cuba. Over the years since then, there's been small gains in private business, but then the government has retrenched and taken things back. And it wasn't until the year 2008 when Raul came to power that Cuba started to see the rebirth of private enterprise. And as Tony said, small-scale urban businesses were allowed with a number of stipulations, and they're called contrapropistas. These are the 7 categories of allowable small businesses. In 2011, the government authorized private businesses, and as Tony said, 201 designated activities categorized into 7 groups. In my talk, I'm going to focus on Group 1, production and sale of food and beverages. Group 3, personal and technical services, which includes repair of mechanical equipment. And Group 4, room rentals. Some of the other reforms back in 2011 allowed government to engage in commercial activities with contrapropistas. Some types of, I'm going to go to TCPs because I can't get contrapropistas out of my mouth, can hire unlimited employees, not just family members. Restaurant seating increased from 12 chairs to 20 chairs and later to 50 chairs. And another reform was that people could rent out their entire home, and public sector employees were allowed to also work in the private sector. By 2013, Cuba had a workforce of 5.1 million people, and over 1 million, or 20%, were working in the private sector, including 430,000 legally registered self-employed, 500 who either owned or leased private plots, and about 600,000 to 1 million in those gray areas, those illegal activities. And as both Tammy and Tony said, the median income of government workers is somewhere between $20 and $30. While we were in Cuba in April of 2016, the government held their 7th Communist Party Congress, and the government stated publicly that private enterprise has a positive role to play in Cuba's future, and they hope to move to legalize thousands of small and medium-sized businesses that have sprung up. And as of 2016, a third of the workers in Cuba are now working in the private sector. The first area I'd like to look at is paladares. They're the privately owned restaurants. This is the story of Cafe Laurent, our first meal in Cuba. The paladares started in private homes. This was our first day tour guide. This is the private home. The restaurant is up on the top on that terrace. And that is our group at our first Cuban meal. We felt welcomed, and we had a lovely 3-course lunch. And we knew it had been a private home because as some of us made our way to the bathroom, there was a lovely bathtub right in the bathroom where it was open to the public. Now these paladares, I'm going to give examples of what Tony said. They have to go around the system to survive. So I'll start by just talking about the tax system, and it's not only for paladares, but it's for all small businesses. First, there's a monthly tax, a tax on net revenue, based on how much they bring in. So 15% for if they bring in 10 to 20,000 pesos, up to 50%. So if you look at Cuban pesos, convertible to convertible pesos, 24 Cuban pesos equals 1 convertible peso. So if they make 20,000 Cuban pesos, that's only $833 a month. So anything over $833 a month, they're paying almost 50% in tax. Plus, they pay tax per employee, as Tony said. So if they have less than 6 employees, they pay 1 part of base salary. If they have more than, if they have 10 to 15, and then if they have greater than 15 employees, they pay to the government 3 times the base salary of Cuba for each employee. And then they also pay a tax at the end of the year. So how do Cubans get around this? Well, Cuba is a cash society. There's no credit cards, there's no banking, there's no checks, so there's no records. And so we have one example of this is Benito. We asked him how much of his revenue goes to the government, and he says that 80% goes, or 90% goes to the government and 30% goes to me. So that's how it happens. Another challenge for paladares is advertising. How do tourists and others find this? Well, to advertise in Cuba, you need to get permission from the government, and we didn't see very much advertising, and to pay a monthly tax, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. So how do the Cubans get around this? They print up little business cards, and they send people out on the streets, and folks who bring guests to restaurants get a little bit of a tip, and the guests arrive in the restaurants. We experienced this model when my friend Elizabeth Jacobson and I wanted to ride in a special Coco taxi. Well, we were greeted by a man who said, "I will bring you to Coco taxi," and he didn't. And we ended up taking a regular taxi back after giving him a nice tip just to get rid of him. And probably the biggest challenge of paladares is lack of access to wholesale distribution channels. Paladares are supposed to pay retail prices for everything that they use. The government monopolizes imports and heavily taxes goods imported by travelers, even if for personal use. It's impossible to find the types of wine, beer, food that they're selling, much less they don't have access to quality, professional level cooking equipment. So when I asked how paladares stock their kitchens and stock their wine lists, I was told that they have to know someone who knows someone. And that's how they run their restaurants. Casa Particulares, and I'm I'm not saying that right either, is a home rental network. We saw these when we were going through the countryside. They're indicated with the blue anchor on the door. And these are home rentals. And many of you probably saw back in about a year ago that Airbnb somehow was able to make a relationship with Cuba and go into Cuba and offer Cuban home rentals on their site. So Holly was one of our MBA students who worked for a hotel chain. Her capstone research centered around the Cuban hospitality industry. She booked a night at an Airbnb in Havana for just $50 just to have the opportunity to interview the owners. They picked her up at the hotel we were staying at, and she found a lovely private apartment with a balcony overlooking the ocean, and was able to talk with them. And the owners are subject to Cuban tax, and they also pay $10 on that $50 to Airbnb. The average host makes about $250 per booking. Airbnb is a very interesting case study. First, I wasn't sure how they made that relationship with Cuba, because what we learned is that the Cuban government requires a majority interest in all business activity from foreigners in Cuba. But what I do know is that just over a year later, 4,000 of the 20,000 private rentals in Cuba are now listed on Airbnb, and over 13,000 Americans have made reservations through Airbnb to stay in Cuba. How can an internet company that runs on credit card transactions work in a country where there's very little internet and it's a totally cash-based society? Well, what they found, as always, the Cubans find a way. I read an article in Forbes about a gentleman named Fonseca. He has access to an internet connection at work, and over the years, before Airbnb, he built a portfolio of about 900 houses that paid him to find reservations for them. Airbnb found him and 8 others like him, and now they go through them. Airbnb goes through these agents to book the rentals. The agent pays cash to them, and the system works. Additional challenges to rental owners is, again, the distribution system. They don't have access to things like water pumps to fix the water system. They don't have access to furniture, to the food for the breakfast. They also don't have access to capital to fix things. Cubans distrust their banks. They don't use their banks. They're too bureaucratic, and they don't do any financing through the banks. And another challenge, again, is the internet. There's very little access to internet. As we were there, there's more internet hotspots, and we'd see large groups of people sitting outside on steps using the internet, but it's very slow and very problematic. My last example is Nostalgia Car. It's an entrepreneurial business owned by a husband and wife, Julio Alvarez and Nidialis Acosta. They transformed a family passion of restoring cars into a very successful business. They specialize in 1950s Chevrolets, and they started in 2012 with one 55 Chevy. They now have over 22 cars and have contracted with over 15 drivers. And they have even started a side business where they refurbish cars that employ 11 workers. Mr. Alvarez and his wife have become quite famous in Cuba. They've been to Washington, D.C. several times, been to the White House, and they're the model entrepreneurs, I believe, in Cuba. But again, he spent a lot of time talking to us about the challenges of running this business. Supply chain, again, is a big one. Where does he get tires, engines, spare parts? Well, he orders them on the web. He has a partner in America. He uses that partner's credit card, and then the partner somehow gets him the supplies and charges a 20% or more surcharge just to get them there. He doesn't have access to a bank, but he was pretty excited when we were there because he just was able to have create a bank account for himself in Miami. I'm just not quite sure how that happened, but he got somebody to get him a bank account. You can find him on the web. The web site is run through a business in Canada, and he wasn't too happy with that business because the prices were going up and it wasn't getting updated as much as he wanted. And the last challenge he's experiencing is brain drain. He takes college-educated graphic design on other students. He teaches them how to refurbish cars, and some of them have been stolen away by American companies who want that talent at their site. So Raul's Cuba seems to be slowly creating a climate that supports small business with an overall goal of 40% of the workforce in the private sector. However, there are still complaints of constant harassment by tax inspectors, shortages of supplies, limited access to the internet, scarcity of quality food, shortage of plumbing and other supplies. There also seems to be wariness and distrust that the government could retrench again and take away many of the reforms. I was really impressed with the innovative solutions to roadblocks and bureaucracy that the Cuban people come up with. Some of them may be illegal, but as Tony said, the Cuban people seem to just take them in stride, and their spirit and pride in their country was evident by everyone that we met. Turn it over to Martin.
Gracias. So you'll hear sort of continuation of the themes we've already talked about here, and how there's change going on and how that change is taking place in Cuba. I'll start out here with a quote. This actually is a part of a slide from Fábrica de Arte, which was a warehouse converted into art gallery with all different kinds of arts from rock and roll on the ground floor to video expositions and all different kinds of things. This was one that caught my eye, and it's part of a larger. The quote is farther in the middle, but talking about art, and in my experience, as far as what I've concentrated my research on, revolves a lot around the term transculturation, and I'll talk about that in a minute here. But a lot of that is taken in terms of culture in general, but more specifically to literature. At least that's my area of focus. So what I'm doing here is sort of a preliminary observation, so to speak, kind of scratching the surface on what maybe could be done or could be revealed with a deeper study. We were only there for about a week, deeper study that would reveal some of these, what I call transcultural engagements that are occurring, have been occurring throughout history and are occurring as well in Cuba today. Transculturación and identities. And what was interesting to me when I first had the opportunity, well, you from go to Cuba, sure. The author that's inspired a lot of my research and a lot of my work is Cubano, so Fernando Ortiz, and he wrote a seminal text called Contradictions Cubano del Tabaco y el Azúcar, which really looked at the processes of transculturation in Cuba. He came up with the term, and so here's the extended version, but I think it's necessary kind of to give you a context of where I'm coming from here. This is from his text. I'm in the opinion that the word transculturation is better expresses the different phases of the process of transition from one culture to another, because this does not consist merely in acquiring another culture, which is what the English word acculturation really implies, but the process also necessarily involves loss or uprooting of a previous culture, which could be defined as deculturation. In addition, it carries the idea of consequent creation of new cultural phenomena, which could be called neoculturation. So this process, right, what we're talking about here, is the creation of new cultural phenomena. And where does that come from? So these processes can be up, down, or down, up. And what I'm looking at here mostly today are processes that I can see, and we've seen examples of that already in terms of what's going on underground, right, and how that's influencing change. I think that's prevalent throughout Cuba today. A little more background here is transculturación narrativa, which is kind of where I'm coming from in terms of my own academic background and kind of extending this term, transcultural engagement, to different areas. So, and this basically looks at artistic forms. And as you read the quote, you can kind of see where Angel Rama is going. He's from Uruguay, where he's going with this in terms of the colonial powers and indigenous cultures in all of Latin America, really. So when we're talking about Cuba, we're talking about African influences, we're talking about indigenous influences, we're talking about European influences, right? And they're the transcultural engagements which have produced what we have in Cuba today. I'm going to take a look at these through the eyes of the billboards, which are very prominent. So we've mentioned already there's almost no advertisement, which is a kind of a nice thing, right? In Cuba, right? You step out speak, I mean, you just don't, if you ever been to any city, right, in, from America, any Latin American city, of course, you'd see, I mean, to the eye, it's, okay, where do I start, right? There's advertisements all over. So you won't see any of that, or very little. In Cuba, what you will see are posters of propaganda. So, and this one you can't quite see it. My photography isn't that great. The partido existe para el pueblo y por el pueblo. So the party, right, exists for the people, right, and by the people. So I'm going to take a look at three different contexts, so to speak, transculturalizing engagements, and you've seen a little bit of this already, Las Terrazas, the clinic there, and Policlinico that we also visited in Havana. So it's another billboard, sorry if I use Spanish, Salud para Todos, propaganda, right, that you'll see, health for all. In Las Terrazas, we have here part of a mural, Mural de Medicina Natural y Tradicional. So this was in the clinic, very prominent. And when we asked, we talked a little bit to the practitioners there, and they said that all doctors, in part of their medical training, receive training in natural traditional medicine. So it's a part of their training from the start. And they said also there's a pharmacy right next door. So 80% of the prescriptions that they write are natural traditional medicines that are prepared in the pharmacy right next door. So this process you can see where it's been through the years, right? Through the years, sort of a transculturation in the medical process in the field itself, right? In terms of treatments and medical services. We'll look at this a little more here. We'll get back. This is kind of out of place, but we'll maybe get back to this. This was also near there. Remesas, remittances. So we offer a service of paying remittance, family remittances through Western Union. Miami, right? Large Cuban community. Where do people get funds in Cuba to do anything? If they can do anything, a lot of it comes from family in the U.S. If we have time, we can talk about that too. Again, Policlinico, this is in Havana. More propaganda. This is in the waiting room. So this is Raul. This is one of his statements, so to speak. But he's talking about how to be successful, how to work together as a community. The last one, we'll get back to this in a little bit. La voluntad de la gente, the will of the people. Right? Bringing that together. More of the waiting room. And here is revolución. It's a great definition. I won't read it right now, but if you want revolution by Fidel, what revolution means. And maybe it's a good time to say too, that in terms of the sort of, when we're talking about the background, right, where are we, the context here? It's all about the revolution, la revolución. So that's, did I skip you?
You went too forward.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to stop here. Here is also in the waiting room, so a visual poster with understanding diabetes, talks about that. really, and we saw that from the demographics that Tony had, right, in terms of longevity in Cuba, right, and the healthiness, general healthiness of the population. A lot of that is, in fact, true and is based on their medical system. While they are very, supplies are very scarce, right? They don't have what they really need, but they focus on preventive medicine. Their system is set up for a doctor to be in charge of a certain area around the clinic, right, and making visits to the families, getting to know the families, and the families are directed to this clinic if they need health care, and then there's also specialized health care areas as well. It's not, the system itself, as Tony mentioned too, the Cuba exports doctors. And so, and this is an area where they have seen a lot of advancement and continue to see that. Where, when we get into transcultural engagements, so talking to these, to the doctors and nurses there as well, we were the first visitors from the US to be there. And in fact, talking to other people since we've come back, there is a lot of medical professionals that go to Cuba, right, to study the system, look at the system, see how it's working. And when we talk about that, short-term and long-term in terms of this transcultural engagement, so we talk about, and so U.S. medical professionals learning, right, from Cuban and having those interactions is one level where we can see that happening and bringing those back, exchanging, having an exchange of ideas and practices, best practices in terms of healthcare. So another billboard alongside the highway. So solo voluntad humana podrá salvar el mundo. Only human will, or the will of humans, will be able to save the world. And so when we saw that earlier too in Raul's statement, so we'll contrapropistas, and we've talked about that already. I won't spend too much time on this, but just in terms of, there's a taxi, again, and you can see the different ways in which this is working. Not all sort of above board, so to speak. Right? How these entrepreneurs, how they're able to survive and make money. So we have, on the one hand, you can see basically geared towards tourism, restored convertible, meaning this is on Benito's farm.
Oh, it is.
Yep. And at the same time, and
That's the pineapple.
that's the pineapple guy, right? You can see his cart. It's a homemade cart, actually made with parts, scrap parts put together. The horse. So the horse isn't. The horses, the animals there, they're not pets, right? They're not for recreation. They're for work. And he selling pineapples, right? So you have the one that is has a little bit of legitimacy, right, as of being a taxista, right? And then you have the other that's, I don't think pineapple seller is on the list. No. So, but you can see it's happening. So these processes are happening, right? In spite of the government attempting to control them, right? They're happening. So, and this is something that happened, been happening all along in Cuba. We want to go into the colonial past and how that the cultures tried from European cultures, right? Working to control, suppress the indigenous cultures, but how they were unsuccessful in many ways. So as you can see, and we don't have time for that now, but the same processes, right, continue to happen, continue to occur. And so right here, you can't quite see it, but it's a horse and a wagon. You see, it's a 4-lane highway. Cars. Where are the cars? Right? It's amazing how little traffic there really is in Cuba. Right? There just isn't. There aren't cars. They don't have them. So there's infrastructure to a certain extent, but there's really a lack of resources, right, to make use of those, what infrastructure there is. Also, one more point here, and I'll move along here quickly, but it reminded me if you're at, say, driving through Duluth or Superior Sunday at about noon, and there's a Vikings-Packers game, right? There's nobody. That's the way a lot of the highways were, and a lot of times in Cuba. So the pressures, right? The pressures for reform are coming from below in a lot of senses. The third one, la palabra enseña, el ejemplo guía. So the word teaches, an example guides. And another quote from Che, which are all over. This is the school in Las Terrazas. Vas bien, Fidel? Fidel, you're doing good. There he is. This is you can kind of see it's fairly well. I mean, it was clean. It was actually a UNICEF site. It was very well, in terms of others that we saw, fairly well maintained. Here we have this is near our hotel in Havana, Escuela Primaria, elementary school. And you can kind of see the condition that it's in. And this is very typical of most structures in Cuba, right? Sort of in this decrepit state. In spite of that, their education system is, they have a very high literacy rate. It contributes to the education, overall education of the people, very well educated society. Being able to export doctors is an example of that. And I'll talk a little bit more. Is it the next one? Well, before we get to Socialismo Muerte, in terms of the education, so I went to Holly, that was mentioned earlier, that you mentioned. She was looking at Airbnb and she rented one. So I went with her to do an interview. This was something that was great for me because I did a lot of translating and I went with students and I could talk for a long time about different contexts and translating and how those, and what I learned there. But in there, so we were talking to, it was a young couple. She worked for a Chinese company. She could travel throughout the world. She did travel. And her husband trained dolphins. He made the minimum wage, right? But together, they were lucky because her family had a house, his family had a house, and they were very, the lone descendants, so to speak. So they actually had one that they could rent, right? And they were renting this out. So that's how they were able to do that. So they had a house that they were renting. It was actually more like an apartment. So an apartment that they were renting. And in the time that they had started with Airbnb, that was back in November 2015, till the time that we were there, it had been full every night. Every night. So what they were planning to do, what they were doing with what they'd earned, is they were going to buy another house, right? In quotations, because you can't really. But they and begin to expand that way. It also points to when we talk about equality in Cuba, right? There is those who are more well off than others, right? So, and that's problematic for the government, for the future of Cuba. So, I'm going to finish up here. Socialismo muerte. Another one, la revolución seguirá adelante. Revolution will continue forward, even if it's in a car from the 50s. I'll finish here with the revolution of Cuban people will again rise to the occasion. This was July 8, 2016 by Raúl Castro. And you can see all the things that he's done, or that all his titles there. Right? Assembly of the People's Power, 8th Legislature, 7th period of ordinary sessions at the American Convention Center. So, what does that mean? The people will rise to the occasion. We were with a taxi driver, and we mentioned this already, and he said, Cubans, we're magicians. Somos magos. We're magicians. You know, we can do incredible things with seemingly nothing. Right? So rising to the occasion. If we look at the billboards, right? What does that imply? If the government is by the people, for the people, right? Or is the government, is it going to change? If the word teaches and example guides, right? We have a lot of examples of ways to make things work, so to speak, right? Is that not what we're seeing happening in Cuba, right? A lot of the slogans, so to speak, the political slogans, I think actually kind of speak to what the people are trying to do, right, on their own. And I think that if we look at it in terms of transcultural contexts and engagements, those are things that are happening, right, from as a means of necessity in most cases, but it's definitely happening, causing the government to respond to changes, right, made by the people who have very little and are trying to move forward. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what role the people play in this continued change. I think it's going to just keep going. I think it's going to, with the types of tourism that's happening, the people-to-people context and the kind of interactions that I saw, I think there's going to be a lot more change in Cuba. How it happens and how it manifests itself politically is another question. So this is one last one here. As long as there's a man or a woman with arms, right, in their hand, a country cannot be occupied. So there's a lot of that as well. That's the Bay of Pigs. And I think that's about it that I have for now. I think, questions?